In around 1968, I was working in my small studio near MacArthur Park in Los Angeles while I was attending Otis Art Institute. And a fella came in to my studio and said, I want to see what you do. And I showed him a bunch of pieces. He says, you know, I can sell this stuff. Those were his words. And I said, okay, great, go sell some stuff. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. In the meantime, I would make something and he would take a look at it and say, great, I'm going to show this to someone, some stores that I sell to. And he sold my first order to a company called Moss Brothers in mid-state California. I don't even remember, maybe Fresno. And at that point, it started to expand, and he was selling more than I could produce by myself. So I looked around for some potters that could work for me, and in those days there weren't a lot of potters that knew production. I got one potter and he was great, but then he went back to school, so I didn't have a potter. So ultimately somebody said, you know, there are some really good potters in Mexico that maybe you could bring in over the border. Well, I went down to Tecate, Mexico, where I had heard about some potters, and they were from Guanajuato, which is further south in Mexico. And I couldn't get them across the border because the federal government said, no, they'll be replacing other people here in the U.S. and we don't want them to replace. I said, well, I can't find any potters. I've been looking for potters for quite some time. Now remember, 1968, there weren't a lot of people that were out making production pottery. So ultimately what I did was I went down to Tecate and I set up a little production plant just to make the bisqueware. And I brought up a couple of potters from Guanajuato. Ultimately we had about 4 or 5 people that would make the pottery on the wheels that I brought down. And I needed a way of picking up the goods. So I went and bought this beautiful truck, a 1946 Chevy, because that's what I could afford. And I would drive down once a month down to Tecate and pick up all the bisqueware. And in the meantime, I found that there was a place called Rancho La Puerta where I would stay and demonstrate in the evenings. And then in the morning, we'd load it all up and I'd drive it home, which was Los Angeles. So I bought this truck, went down there for about 3 years in it, driving back and forth over the mountains to get to Tecate. And so driving her, you're talking about 1946. There is no power steering. It's a 4 on the floor transmission, and I had to go over a pass to get into Tecate, which mostly was in first or second gear. So it took a long time to get there, and she was guzzling water. I had this water bag that was hanging on the front so that I could pour water into her when we got over the pass, or maybe before we got over the pass. But she made it every time for those years. And like I say, she's my buddy. The crew that I had in Pasadena, and this was just before I took her up to our last trip and then up to Northern California, everyone said, why don't we take a trip, in the green truck? We called her the green truck. And I said, sure. And they said, well, why don't we go to Palm Springs? And so I drove, one of us hopped in the other side, and the other 8 people were in the back of the truck. And the truck is a refrigerated truck. So when it started getting hot, I pulled over and I said, are you guys okay? And they said, wow, it's really hot in here. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to turn on the refrigeration. And you can see there's still a refrigeration unit up here. So I turned on the refrigeration. I drove for about, maybe an hour. And I decided to pull over. And they were all huddled together like this. Ultimately, I moved to Healdsburg, California, where it was almost impossible to take that trip. And finally, by 1972, when I moved up here, there were enough potters now that I could hire locally, and so we started the plant with 3 or 4 potters, and ultimately we had 100 people working both glazing and throwing in the plant. And this guy came to the property here and got retired in 1972, and the original tag is still on the license plate in the back, the 1972 tag. So she's been with me, hanging out periodically and saying hi, and I just I don't have the heart to get rid of her.